Thanks for choosing to come and spend this evening with us. It's really, I know, difficult to choose where am I going to place my time and the most value of my time. And this evening as we're together, I hope that the things that we talk about as far as parenting and the information that we share with you is helpful in understanding our role, not only as parents, but grandparents and future parents, and also as a community as a whole of how can we be able to safeguard ourselves against this growing plague in our community. It's interesting when we talk about safety with vehicles. How many of you drove a car here tonight? Everyone? Somebody drove or somehow you got here. Isn't it interesting that when you look at the laws that apply to traffic, we all agree in America to drive on the right side of the road. We just agreed to that. And we got here safely by abiding by certain laws or rules that said, you know what, I agree to stop at an intersection or a stop sign. Or I'll yield to oncoming traffic. Or I'll check the crosswalk to make sure that there's not someone crossing that specific pathway that my car is going to go. And when we look at those laws, by agreeing to laws, we actually feel a level of safety. And yet we all know that within 2 miles of your home, you're at least 70% likely to be in an accident. So we took a certain risk by even getting into our cars. But also by accepting that there are laws, we put on our seatbelt to reduce the risk of potentially being in a harmful accident. We prepared our car by filling it with gas. We check the tires, we change the oil, and we do certain things as maintenance to make sure that our car is functioning. And when we get into our cars, driving our car, the real challenge of autopilot still exists because the constant driving of a car is actually making adjustments. So the steering wheel isn't really anything of a guide, but more of an adjustment. So when we look here at a steering wheel, the purpose of the steering wheel is to constantly make adjustments or corrections. And if we didn't make those corrections and just let the car drive itself, we wouldn't make it to the next turn or the next intersection very well. So when we look at this, one of the keys that we need to understand is that laws provide for us a degree of protection. And the keeping of laws increases for us trust. So let's talk about the relationship of laws and trust and the importance of keeping laws to increase trust. In a couple's relationship, a husband and a wife agree to keep certain laws. We may call those marital vows. We may call those agreements, prenuptial agreements. Say that I agree to do this, I agree to do this. And as we continue to adjust or correct our course throughout marriage, one of us agrees to take out the trash, or one of us agrees to change the light bulb, or one of us agrees to other tasks or other writing corrections and agreements as we continue through our marriage and our relationship. And what's really interesting is, as we continue through this process, we include now new little people into this relationship who also have responsibilities of sharing. And so we try to teach them laws that would help them to make corrections as well. A lot of those laws that we give, especially to the little people, can often be resisted. And the better that we as adults agree to keep the laws of the relationship, the greater the trust is increased in our companionship, and the more then that the children will respect the laws that are given. So for example, if dad says, hey son, no television after 10 p.m., and the son says, great dad, but why do you always watch TV until 1 a.m.? How well is that law going to be respected in the home? Or if dad says no computer time after a certain hour, and yet dad stays up all hours of the night working on the computer, how well are the laws going to be agreed to and how much trust is going to be sustained in the family? Not very much, right? So as we continue into a new era of vehicles, if you will, and exploration and the accessibility of information, as we travel the internet, as we travel through this world of computer ages, the laws that we create as families that govern the internet, our cell phones, texting, and messaging, the more that we can actually come to an agreement that will help to safeguard us. Okay? So how many of you were raised in an era when your mom and dad had specific rules for answering the telephone? I got my back to you for just a moment, but remember when phones had cords? Okay? How many of you had rules in your home about how to answer a telephone? Okay? When I was growing up, my mom was a stickler. If we said hello, oh my goodness, it was, "Hi, Nielsen's, how may I help you?" Okay? If we just said hi or hello, or what do you want? Unacceptable, right? And yet, when we answer our cell phones or when we send a text message, what are the laws or the rules that we've agreed to as a family that help us to protect us, to increase our trust? Do we have certain rules that protect us and help us to be able to recognize where is safety? Okay? So one of the rules that an intersection that my wife and I agreed to when it comes to computer, before we even got married, we agreed that we would never be on the computer alone. There's no alone computer time. The computer is in a room where we can all see. You know what's so amazing about that rule? I've never been exposed to pornography with my wife. I've never had anything like that happen to me, and I've been married for 12 years, and I'm so grateful. Okay? Because before we even got married, we both agreed to this rule and that law we've kept, and our trust has increased significantly. Okay? When it comes to then cell phones and text messaging, isn't it interesting that picture messages actually have the ability to create a level of complacency? So let me say it this way. How many of you were raised in an era when, in about 6th grade, "If you like me, check yes or no," was the note that was secretly passed hand to hand all the way across the classroom with the hope that the teacher wouldn't intercept? Okay? And yet now, there's no hand-to-hand exchange, and there's no teacher there who might monitor that, and yet the yes or no is not now check yes or no, it's send me back a message or send me back a photo or send me something more risque that says that you really like me. And so now we start to see messaging, again, that has no rules or boundaries. And the day of sneaking out to be able to see somebody, because you can't get on the phone and ring them in the middle of the night without the family hearing you in the kitchen where the central phone is, and sneaking out to go and see them means they can actually communicate all night, right? And so text messaging can be exchanged and they can continue the relationship throughout the night, and there's no boundary or rule. So what would be a rule to protect cell phones? So as we go through this, I'm going to create over on this side. So number 1, rules in our relationships. Number 2, rules regarding internet. Rules regarding cell phone, which includes etiquette of calls, texts, and images. And if rules are created by adults, how well do adults keep the rules that teens and young children are also to keep? Or do the rules only apply to the children? That's a real magic marker. It doesn't even... Right. So teens and children. Okay? Let's think about this for just a moment. As we look at these rules, the first thing I really want to focus on this evening is the concept of images. Images are so important because they play such a vital role in relationships. Did you know in our human brains that there's actually a creation of certain areas that specifically control rewards, and we have the ability to have our brain rewarded. For example, as a group, if you will, just respond. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 16 is 32. 32 plus 32 is? What's so amazing about the human brain is that every time that we give a problem and we get a fact correct, the brain says, right. And then it rewards itself for a millisecond with a 9 hertz spike that actually says, correct, give me another one. Correct, give me another one. And when we get that right, it continues to reward itself. Okay? What's so fascinating also about this human brain is that it also has the ability to, so this is actually 1/100th of a millisecond that 9 hertz spike lasts. Okay? Now here's the other thing that's really amazing about this brain and how it's created. The male brain, when it views the image of the female body, will actually have that same 9 hertz reward spike fire for a total of 5 seconds and repeats that every 15 seconds for a total of 5 minutes. Okay? So what initially was just, right, give me another one, now becomes, wow, my wife is beautiful. I can't wait to go home and see her. Wow, that was right. That was good. That was necessary. And consequently, we have this connection between human beings, husbands and wives. It's very important. Okay? It's part of the perpetuation of the species. It's part of something that's very good in humankind. And it's very addictive when we don't understand the role that it plays. Okay? So let me say it a different way. Our minds are actually created in such a way that there's something there that should give us a self-satisfaction. Good job. Way to go. Do it again. You're the champ. Wow, amazing. Okay? Remember all those little super stickers we'd get on the job well done homework? Those stims, though, our own brain gives us like little Shazam symbols that last and help us to create an increased satisfaction in humanness and human relationships. So the male brain actually works this way, and this 9 hertz spike will fire for a full 5 seconds every 15 seconds for a total of 5 minutes. Okay? Extremely powerful and very, very important for our species, if you will. Okay? Well, let's take that another step then. If we begin to understand how that works, what would be then some safe rules around sexuality? So we'll just breach the subject and write it up there for those who are very uncomfortable with that word. And let's start to change our thought process about what is safe about sex. Okay? So when we talk about safe sex, and before we actually enumerate this, let's kind of look at, with that 9 hertz concept, the concept of being able to express feelings. Okay? D-I-C-T, dict, is the root to dictate, dictation, dictionary, a dictator, and so forth. So this root actually has the ability to speak or to communicate feelings through words. That's diction. Okay? Isn't it interesting that the inability to express words or express feelings through words is addiction? Okay? The inability to express feelings through words is addiction. And when we talk about addiction, and when we look at addiction from the perspective of what we're trying to discuss this night, and specifically sexual addiction, no wonder it's so powerful when we talk about that 9 hertz spike and inability to communicate through words feelings. Okay? The inability to express feelings through words is addiction. Does that make sense? So whatever the addiction may be, maybe it's to tobacco. It makes me feel calm. Maybe it's alcohol. It lets me get out into another space where I don't feel comfortable communicating normally. I never feel relaxed enough to interact with other people unless I feel a little bit tipsy. Okay? Maybe it's food. I don't feel comfortable expressing to my spouse how I feel, so I use foods to calm myself down. I have my little secret stash of whatever. Okay? Maybe it's Diet Coke or any of the other things that may create a sense of calming and satisfaction or feelings without words. Okay? Does that make sense? The inability to express my feelings through words is addiction. Okay? So, let's talk about safe sex for a moment. Does anybody have a question up to that point? I don't want to go too fast. We okay there? Okay, thanks. Let me actually write this a little more neatly because I really hope that we can convey, again, a message that feels hopeful before the evening's over rather than just paint a picture that feels like, wow, are we up against such an ominous beast that we can't win? When you were growing up, and again, in your own mind, what were the parameters that were given by your parents that created safety in sex? Did it include something like abstinence? Does that sound familiar? Never do it. Never do it. If you ever do that, you're going to be in big trouble, right? Or abstinence, meaning, sure, you can go out with her, but don't you ever. Because if you do. So then what do we make? Inside we make these never vows. Well, I'll never do that. So what ends up happening is a never vow created around this type of safe sex on the marriage night feels very awkward. Feels kind of, ugh. I said I'd never do this, but now I am. Or the young person that said, I never will until I do. Right? So never is never until I do. Whether that's a vow in marriage or, whoops, I slipped. Because it takes away your choice. So the child has no choice in abstinence because it says never. Right? Which leads then to the next safe sex, which is fantasy. Well, if I'm only doing it in my mind, I'm not hurting anyone else. If I'm only doing it here or in the secret of my room, then no one else knows and therefore they're safe. But that's where pornography sneaks in because the fantasy now becomes something that has to be fulfilled. And so pornography and the secret is where the fantasies are fulfilled. And the challenge of this is that the child can't tell the difference between soft porn and hard porn. So what do we mean here? Again, with the note check yes or no, laugh with me if you still have an old high school or middle school note in your secret stash of boxes. Laugh with me if you ever kept a note for more than 1 week. Laugh with me if you actually kept a check yes or no note with a picture signed that said, too cute to be forgotten. Right? And those funny little things that were there when we were young that we kept as memorabilia, the child still wants to keep. And what ends up happening now with the fantasy is that the text messages are kept, and so are the pictures that are sent. But originally, remember when cute little so-and-so really caught your fancy and you had their picture and you kept it with you? And you'd have to look at that picture every so often, or maybe you had it in your Trapper Keeper. Remember when those were cool? Or in your folder, okay? Or you had it taped in your special little pencil box. That was something special to you. But now, just a picture and the frequency of the pictures, a smile isn't as satisfying, because now you're asking for someone to send you a picture of more than just their face. Well, what are you wearing today? That's innocent, isn't it? Why don't you send me a picture of what you're wearing? I just wanted to see. I just wanted to see what it looks like without that. Well, what if you weren't wearing that? What if you turned around? Well, what if you looked at this way? And then all of a sudden you start to have the kids in the background flashing the other kids. And it's not the girls, it's the boys. So now you have a girl doing a selfie, and who's in the background flashing everybody on that picture. And the over frequency starts to dull that 9 hertz frequency that used to say, wow, that's my little girlfriend. I thought she was cute. Or wow, he sent me a picture and I had it from his yearbook. Or wow, I finally got the yearbook and I had to look at it a couple of times this year just to remember that cool note that they wrote me. It's no longer there because fantasy can be satisfied so quickly. So what really is pornography then? Does it have to be full nudity? The answer is absolutely not. Pornography is anything that triggers illicit, erotic thought. The National Coalition of Pornographers, a multi-billion-dollar industry, met in the United States. Guess in which city in 2004?
Vegas.
Say it?
Vegas.
Nope. Salt Lake City, Utah. And there they set out a target age to expose internationally the age of pornography, but specifically the United States. Guess what the target age for children exposure to pornography is set by them in that year? 7. Who said it? 4 years old. 4 years old is the target age for exposure to pornography by the National Coalition of Pornography. Okay? A multi-billion-dollar industry. They want to expose that age of child to pornography.
What year was that again?
2004. Okay? Interesting. I thought, no, that can't be, because I had a mother who was the vice president of the National Mothers Association. She came to me as a patient and said, this is the age. I said, that can't be. And then that day I went home, and my little boy, who was 3 years old at the time, was watching a movie. And as I sat and watched The Flintstones, the movie, all of a sudden I realized, why on earth is this lady dressed in a leopard skin bikini top and cut off miniskirt shorts in a child's movie? And I realized that's pornography. They're trying to desensitize my 3-year-old and tell him the woman's body isn't anything but an object. View at your own discretion. It's something that has no sacredness to it. I went and took that video out and threw it away immediately. Okay? But that's where it starts harmlessly, right? And that's their target age. So my next invitation, and first invitation actually tonight, after inviting you to come, next invitation, take home. Go home and look as a parent and think for a moment, what in my home, either by intentional movie or Victoria's Secret, is sneaking into my home by mail order, by catalog, that's here every day that really shouldn't be here. Okay? I had a very good friend in 1996 say to me, in a group of young people that I was with, he said, it's interesting, I got home the other day and I was going through the mail, and what was right there on my counter but this Victoria's Secret catalog. Okay? He says, I'm a man and I could have looked, but my mind would have appreciated that and my heart would have been sickened by it. Okay? And so when things like that come to my home, which they do, I could choose to look and I choose not to, because to look is just an opening into a slippery slope of fantasy. Okay? So there has to be a greater yes, not a no, burning inside of us. And that yes has to say, yes, I could, but yes, the sacredness and the sanctity of my wife and my daughter are more important than whatever could be here. Okay? So, women, be aware of what you're allowing to come into your home, either intentionally or unintentionally.
I think so you have to be.
So the statement is, when you go to a grocery store, have you ever noticed that the target level of all the tabloid magazines at the checkout is the same level as a little person either sitting there in the grocery cart, right? Or the little person hanging on next to it. It's right at their eye level. And what was some action that was taken? Just cover it up. We don't need to see it. If somebody does, great. It's your freedom. We choose not to. Excellent. Okay? So as we look at this again, if abstinence never until I do, fantasy, soft and hard, is existing, then the third one is what more adults use as a means of safe sex. And that is what we call eunuchs. Does anybody know what a eunuch is? Do you remember what eunuchs were from the Bible in the Old Testament? Eunuchs were emasculated slaves that had no ability to propagate the species. Okay? They were slaves that could serve among the women because they couldn't reproduce. Okay? So if they're emasculated, no problem. Well, how do adults emasculate each other? This is where you see people in the community who have high rank, if you will, a man and a woman who would talk with each other. Oh, they'll never cross that boundary. We could talk about anything. He's safe. We can talk about anything. Oh, we could talk about anything. They'd never cross that boundary until, whoops, they do. So this means that they have no parts. Okay? So that's the feeling of, oh, it's safe to be with this person after hours. It doesn't matter. They don't have any parts. They'd never cross that line. We could talk about anything. About my home, their home. No problem. It's safe. They'd never cross these lines. And so as adults, we end up making eunuchs out of each other and saying, it's really safe. It really doesn't matter. Okay? The last one, though, is to acknowledge again with this brain that we were created with appetites, passions, desires, and parts that are godly. My belief says that we are all created after God's image. And because of that, I hold that in me is an appetite, a passion, a desire, and parts that are godly. And because of that, God gave us some bounds that say, yes, I have all of these, but I choose not yet, or not now, to express them. Of those 4 safe sex rules, which feels safest to you? Number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4? Definitely number 4. Which of those 4 would be safest then to incorporate as a family and teach our children? Which would feel safest for a 14-year-old boy? You know, son, I want to talk to you about something that's really important. It's called masturbation. Have you ever heard of it? Oh yeah, my friends talk about it all the time at school, right? It's always talked about. When did you hear about that? Oh, about 3 years ago. Oh, okay. I guess I missed the timing. Sorry. Let's go back 3 years, could we? Let's talk about your parts, your appetites, your passions, and your desires. And recognize that all of those were put into you by a God that loves you and that created you after His image. Therefore, He has those same appetites, passions, parts, and desires that we have, only in a younger phase or a younger beginning. And that God who loves us gave us then some specific rules to keep those things safe that say, not yet. You're going to have some interesting feelings. You know, when you go into 5th grade, I don't know how it was for you, but I was 10 years old once. And I noticed a couple of girls on the playground for the first time. Wow, she was cute. I never thought she was cute. We've been playing together for the last 5 years. Where'd she come from? And all of a sudden, she was cute. In 6th grade, I got my first check yes or no. I had no clue who the girl was. But one of my friends said, Jared, if you don't check yes, you are crazy. Yes. When my dad found out, he said, what are you doing? I don't know. I just thought it was a good idea. My buddy said, check yes. She's really cute, right? Felt like Rudolph. Remember? She says, I'm cute. Could have jumped over a school building that day, right? The interesting thing is we've all gone through this, but if we don't understand where those feelings come from and that they're actually good, then what do we start to feel when we actually start to acknowledge that those feelings are happening? We start to use guilt. Oh no, I feel so guilty. I was exposed to that Victoria's Secret, that Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. Oh no, I'm so bad. And all of a sudden, the feeling of guilt turns into shame. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did a study where they actually found that of the boys who become addicted to pornography, most of them are somewhere in the age of 14 years old. And those who actually have been exposed aren't fringe boys. They aren't boys who don't attend church. They're actually the best boys. And what they found is when a young man is exposed who's been living or exposed to this type of a rule, in his mind, one exposure says, I'm so shameful. And because of shame, he hides. And when he hides and withdraws, he's at a perfect time set up to go and look again. And once he looks again, he's hooked forever. Okay? Because what happens is that initial exposure causes the brain to crave it, and because he can't say anything about it, it continues to burn until he goes and looks again, and now he's hooked. And now the shame keeps him stuck there, and that 9 hertz spike that continued to fire, all of a sudden overcomes the shame for a moment and feels like a tremendous pleasure. Wow, right, do it again. And then he has to deal with the consequence of, oh no, why did I do that? And so the shame cycle begins. And he actually starts then to live in a shame lie cycle. Now, the question again that came here was of fantasy. I've been speaking primarily of young men. What is pornography to girls? Is it pictures?
Words.
It's more often the words, and especially in the fantasy in the books. Okay? Interesting. Read some of the romance novels that teens are exposed to now that are really, they aren't that bad, are they? It depends on what you consider bad. For a teenager who's starting to feel appetites, passions, and desires, and it's talking about how the man's holding her hand and how their bodies are touching and how their hearts are pounding, and all of a sudden that fantasy in the young woman's mind becomes very real. And in fact now, 54% of young men are addicted to pornographic images, and between 48 and 51% of the young women are also addicted to pornographic images. So what only used to be words and books and literature is now also becoming in the female brain and in the teenager and the young preteen also images. So the female mind is not immune to pornography. Okay? Again, half and half, which is significant. Because back in my day, whoever thought that a girl had a problem with that, okay, it was always the guys. The guys were the ones that were troubled, troublemakers, looking for it, okay? But it's equal now because it's shared, okay? And it becomes now something that we have to really be mindful and thoughtful of. So again, if we look at shame and we use shame as the protection, then abstinence creates for us again more never vows. I'll never do that again, says the boy. I'll never do that again. Until he does, and now he's beating himself up. And his own conscience continues to beat himself up until he starts to get to a point where he no longer feels, because he has to lie about the shame. And the torment that he creates within himself is more and more that problem. Okay? So what are some signs to watch for? Remember, if I had a check yes or no note in my pocket or in my Trapper Keeper, I'd keep that pretty close to me, right? Well, nowadays, can I borrow this just for a second? What do kids do when you reach for their cell phone? If your child has a gasp and hurries and puts it back into his pocket, or if a text message comes and they're afraid of you seeing it, warning sign, okay? If your child's passcode on their cell phone is not accessible to you, beware, okay? If your child takes a mobile device to their private space, whether that be their office in their bathroom or their bedroom, beware. So what are some rules that we could create around cell phone, iPads in the bathroom, cell phones and iPads in the bedroom, personal computers, televisions in the bathroom or the bedroom, okay? Just a question. What would be or what would feel safe to you as a family? And how could this type of a safe sex rule be applied in teaching your young people and maybe even your spouse about the importance of this type of a plague? This type of a plague. Okay? Where do we begin? It really begins again with our parents. If the father's saying, hey, I'm really committed to this, then guess what? The kids will likely be more committed to this. One of the biggest challenges that I've ever faced in helping families was this mom who came in, tons of tears, comes in and visits with me first. I'm going to send in my son, 14 years old. 14-year-old comes in. Yeah, I'm addicted to pornography, whatever. Well, where did this start? Reality? My dad exposed me to it. He forgot to shut down the computer. He didn't erase his history on the computer. And now the child's exposed, okay? Where does most pornography exposure occur from? From someone who's known. Typically, a family member. Why? Because older brother feels shameful and now he doesn't know what to do with it. So what does he do? Exposes a younger sibling. I can't tell you how many young people I've worked with where an older brother felt like he was exposed and now he's taking his younger sister or younger brother out to the barn to show him what he's been exposed to. Okay? I can't tell you how many times we've worked with young people who have fantasy and are afraid of expressing fantasy, but they live on one coast, so now they fly in from the other coast, and now it's just this weekend with cousins, and what ends up happening? Somebody's exposed. Okay? Well, it's easy because I'm going to be gone. I had to get rid of it. I had to vomit that somehow. I had to be freed of it. So what do? They share it. Did you know that right now, if you look in the front of the Boy Scout manual, it talks about protecting your children, okay? Did you know that the majority of exposures to molestation of little boys is actually by older girls? In fact, the statistic is 70% of boys who are molested by older girls. Okay? Who molested the older girls? Somebody else. And if you actually follow the line of perpetration, it's someone molesting someone molesting someone molesting someone. and it goes back through generations. Okay? When we look at that, most of those children who've been molested are molested by a family member or someone that's very close to the family. So when I work with young people who come in who are not so young anymore, meaning 40 plus, who say, yeah, I was raped by the family friend at a Christmas party, and that was continued for years. Or the young child who says, yeah, I was molested by a girl who just came to visit. She was just a friend, and now he's exposed himself to cousins. Or we look at children who have been exposed to other children because the first exposure was something that happened accidentally. Or the father who intentionally takes his kid out to the desert where he's going to go for horse rides, and he ends up giving him pornography. Or the father who takes his boys to Las Vegas, says, well, you're old enough. This is what men do. If we do or see those types of habits and patterns, how easy is it to enforce other types of thought? It's very difficult. And so this boy that I started with, the 14-year-old, how easy is it for us to help him when he says, really? My dad doesn't care. Why should I? Right? So again, let's think through these thoughts of what is safe and then apply that. Now, any questions to that point? The question is, how prevalent is pornography, and are the efforts to stop addictions helping? So first of all, how prevalent is pornography? Yeah, if we aren't saying extremely, I mean, it doesn't even have to be sought out. Okay? So the actual rule, and I ask that this be sent out regarding pornography exposure, is crash and tell. If we establish this type of a rule in our families, that we immediately turn it off. It doesn't matter what the power is, and I don't care what gets shut down. I don't care if we lose the whole computer. Crash the computer and come and tell. You have permission, son or daughter, to tell. Is immediately downloading their brain. If their brain can't download it, it's going to keep burning until they have to go and look again. So the key is crash and tell. Is that only for the children? Absolutely not. I was in Europe back in December. I just turned on the TV, and there it was. Really? I just had the TV on. So immediately, I went and told someone. That just helped me to just know it was gone. I didn't have to go back and keep looking. Because crash and tell allows our minds to download something and not have it burn a hole in our heads. Okay? For both genders, boys and girls. How old is too old to explain crash and tell? If you felt uncomfortable, come and tell me. Okay? How young is too young without creating curiosity? I'll tell you what we've done. We have a weekly family night, and what we do is we've reviewed with our kids, often with paper dolls, what's safe. So our little kids understood that this is safe to have clothes on. And if a doctor needs to, they can help you when your clothes are partially removed or fully removed because they're safe. Dad or mom could help you if it's time for bath. Does anybody else have permission to take off your clothes? Absolutely not. Do you have permission to yell? And the answer is yell yes. Okay, but it's actually yell no. So we actually practice yelling no. Because so often we take away the power of the child to say no. Our little children tell us no back. Don't you tell me no. Okay? But we need to give them permission when it's safe to say no, and what's appropriate to say no, and how loudly they can say no. So one of my kids' favorite activities growing up has been permission to yell no. And they love to yell no. Because no means absolutely not. A perpetrator that actually has someone yell no to them will be startled, because that's our first line of defense. And if our children understand their body, and this is the area that's safe, should anybody be looking at that? No. Should anybody be taking pictures and sending those of me or me of myself? Absolutely not. So when we understand the protection of no, no actually protects my identity. So is it too young to start to talk about that? Absolutely not. My little boy's so cute. My wife's very, very good at talking with my kids. She takes them to and from school. She'll periodically ask, how are things going, what's going on, what's happening, and so forth. One day she was talking to my son and said, has any boy ever exposed himself to you? Has he ever pulled down his pants and showed you his private parts? My little boy said, yeah. Wasn't the answer my wife was expecting, but she thought she should ask him. He said, that actually happened when I was 4. I felt really uncomfortable, and I left, but I didn't tell you because I was afraid you wouldn't let me go back and play with that boy anymore. Okay? Interesting. Have you ever asked your children, have they been exposed? Have you ever given them a safe place, non-judgmental, to say, actually, I was exposed? Have you given them an environment to say, I felt uncomfortable when? My son's really good about sharing that. Looking at Guinness Book of World Records, 2nd grade. One of the boys comes in, he, and is showing all the kids, all the naked people on the roller coaster. Biggest world record, most nude people riding on a roller coaster. Whole book of world records. Not a single problem, and all of a sudden, right in the middle, is the Magic Kingdom or whatever it is with full frontal nudity. Okay? And all the boys, he came right home and he said, guess what happened today at school? This. Wow. Good for you, son. Thanks for being able to be brave and safe enough to say you're exposed. Okay? What happened? Another time he came home, 3rd grade. Another boy sitting in class has in his reading book a picture that's inappropriate. Came home. Mom, guess what happened to me today? This boy laughing in class. I just went and told the teacher. She took care of it. Okay? Yay! Good choice. And may even help that boy. Okay? So, yell no to protect my identity. Understand what is safe. Dads, as your daughters grow, teach them what's safe in contact with them. Just because they're developing, don't start to back off. Okay? Oh yeah, remember when it was fun to wrestle when they were pre-10-year-olds? Now all of a sudden they have something popping out on their shirt. They're trying to cover and you're trying not to touch because you're wrestling inadvertently. What's appropriate? Where are men's hands safe to touch? And help them to see what is the relationship, because they're looking to us, dads, to know what is safe and appropriate. Okay? Is it safe to hold hands? Absolutely. Is it safe to touch where these clothes should be? Absolutely not. Dad, is it okay if we're still playing? Sure. Can we still wrestle? Yeah, but we got to be careful, don't we? Because guess what? Some boy on the high school playground is going to try to wrestle with her. Some guy at the college is going to try to give her a piggyback ride or dance with her as close as he can. And if we haven't taught her what boundaries are, someone else will try to impress or put their boundaries on her. Okay? The same thing with the boys. So when this gentleman was working in New York, the statement was, he was working with a Jewish mother, and she said to her daughter, from your neck to your knees is off limits. That's great advice. Great advice. Okay? Because if you look at that, it's not saying abstinence, it's not saying never, it's saying not yet. And if you have appetites, parts, passions, and desires that are godly, then there must be something safe that God would say, this is safe for you to use. In the Old Testament, there's a story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These guys wouldn't eat the king's meat. They were just good men. And because of that, the king said, into the fire. So they stoked it up 3 times warmer than usual. Because of their faithfulness, when they went into the fire, it says they had on their clothing and their garments. And I believe that those garments were significant because in the Jewish faith and other Christian faiths now, garments have a significance of covenant making to God. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they wore their garments, were protected. And I'd invite those who would understand something of that of a religious nature to expose or impress on their children's minds how that might be a protection to them also. For people who may not aspire or hold to that, from the neck to the knees is a pretty safe idea. And I actually say to my Boy Scouts, if you can put a basketball uniform on her, that's where it would not be safe to touch. Okay? Just, if you know what a basketball uniform is, boys. The guys wear them, the girls wear them. Not the volleyball uniforms. Those aren't safe. Not the wrestling uniforms. Those aren't safe. The basketball uniforms, that's safe. Okay? And they get it. They get it. That's where we can actually then create something that's tangible and visible as a protection. Now, again, if soft porn begins with exposures of pictures, my first caution to parents be no phone messaging with pictures for teens and preteens. What need does a child have to send a picture to their friends on instant messaging? Especially now when many of those instant messaging programs actually have the ability to delete all of the history. Okay? To delete any of the people that they've shared with and all the background history of it. Okay? Messaging, really, what purpose does a cell phone serve when in our day growing up, did we even have a cell phone? How on earth did we ever communicate with our parents? I know the smoke signals never worked in Richfield. I never even tried. Mirrors didn't work because we could never get it high enough above the valley to send back to mom. But for some reason, I made it to every one of my practices on time. It may require a little bit of planning, and yes, you may have to wait, or yes, you may have to go to the office and make a call. But if it's more than just a call to certain numbers, I would discourage it. That's my personal advice. Okay? Beyond that, internet. Where is internet safe and safest? It's safest in public. Because it is a World Wide Web and it's worldwide information. Where are you going to share worldwide information? Hopefully to the world. That's something that you'd be not ashamed to share in the dark or in the light. Okay? And when we look at this then, applying rules in relationships, the adult rules in the relationships is where it begins. Thanks. So when we look at healthy relationships, rules that apply to driving cars, driving ourselves through the internet, and helping us to be able to be exposed to all the beautiful things that are out there. Begins with understanding a rule that we are godly, that our appetites, passions, and desires, and our parts have a purpose. But those have a specific protection. If we eliminate shame and guilt as the reason that we keep it, and keep those relationships because they're loving and sacred, our happiness will increase exponentially. And there will be a tremendous greater level of satisfaction in our relationships and peace in our homes. And let me ask you then, just to answer these questions. How much do we share, first of all, here? How much is appropriate to share to avoid curiosity? Okay? How much is appropriate to share to avoid curiosity? Well, if we look at the intention of the pornographers is 4-year-old exposure, if we're trying to avoid curiosity, we better first understand that we can talk about appetites, passions, and desires and parts in an appropriate way. We have to wash our bodies, keep yourself clean. We can talk about that without it being inappropriate. But then we should also give the warning. If someone tries to violate that or encourage you to disrobe that, we ought to talk about that at least by 4 years old, right? At least. And the likelihood then, if someone's going to actually expose themselves, or a movie or a magazine or any other form of literature, we better give enough information that they would know that felt wrong. So really the key is, did it feel inappropriate? Did it feel unsafe? Did you feel that that interaction left you uncomfortable? And if it did, is it safe to come and tell me? I hope you will. I hope you come and tell me first. Okay? Now, recently I heard of a talk that was given that a man was sharing about his experience as a boy. And it actually was shared more appropriately as an adult who was interviewing a young man, and this young man said, "When I was a boy, my dad came to me, and he said, 'Son, I was 9 years old once. When I was 9, the boys started noticing that on the playground they could tell off-colored jokes. And you're going to be 9 this next year. Just want you to know, when you start to hear off-colored jokes, come and tell me.' The next year he said, 'You know, son, I was 10 years old once, and the kids on the playground started to notice the girls. You're going to start to notice the girls. I was 10 once. When you notice the girls, why don't you come and tell me? You know, son, when I was 11 once. It was interesting because I started noticing the girls, and the girls started noticing me, and they started passing notes. When you get a note, why don't you come and tell me?' And this boy said this went on and on and on until he graduated from high school at the age of 18. Said, 'My relationship with my dad has prepared me the best for the world that I'm living in now.'" Okay? So dads, I'd encourage you to recognize that maybe you were 9 once. Maybe you were 11 once. Or maybe even younger. When I tell my little girl, I was 8 once. She loves that. "You were 8 once, Dad? Tell us that story." "Well, actually I was." And she laughs and laughs and laughs. Okay? But what's really fun about that is it allows them to see us not set up on this pedestal of untouchables that they would never trust to come and tell. They realize that we're real. And because we're real, they're real, all of a sudden this distance of trust that we had talked about earlier is naturally engendered because we're both good enough. When my dad told me that he and his friends at the age of 14 pushed the hay wagon up to the top of the hill at Moroni and then all jumped on and rode it down right across Main Street as the highway patrolman passed. And they all bailed and went running off in the bushes. And of course, once time passed, they all went back and tried to push the hay wagon right back up the hill again. Wasn't that great? It was harmless, okay? But my dad was 14 once. My dad was 17 once. And as dads and moms, and as we relate to our kids and help them understand that we were once there, the likelihood of them telling increases, okay? Now, I'm not talking about escapades like, now I want you to know when we start to go through things that would actually damage them. That's not appropriate, okay? If there are things that you really shouldn't have done, maybe those things are best left unmentioned because that gives license to then fall into the same trap. As a for example, there's a young man that I worked with in scouting, great kid, turned 14 years old, still a great kid, but he was growing up listening to his dad say, "When I was a young man, I was a fighter. I was always every weekend in the bar. I was taking cocaine. I was doing this as I went into college age." Well, guess what happened to that boy when he turned 14? He couldn't wait to get into his first fight and get drunk the first time. And my great scout just went away. Why? Because his dad had given him permission and license to do things that weren't what we would observe when I was 14 or 15 or 16. It became something of more of a red badge of courage, and I can't wait to graduate and prove to you, Dad, I'm like you. Okay? So let's also then be wise in what we share. Not that we never did, or that we never could have, but that we actually share what's appropriate. Okay? It's a lot of information tonight. Does anybody have a question that was unanswered? Does anyone have something of a comment that you'd like to share? The question is, some personalities aren't in youth necessarily forthright or able to express, or in their personality they're more reserved. What do we do in allowing them to be able to express? Well, here's an interesting thing. You're right, not all people speak. And they aren't all really fluent in speech, are they? So consequently, when we talk about diction and addiction, it's easy for them to hide without words. But expressing ourselves as human beings is something we do, okay? So as I've worked with some young people, allowing them to actually bring in their art and show me what they're drawing. They're actually drawing things that are attempts to express themselves. I think one of the best pictures I've seen in an attempt to express self was a young woman who had drawn a picture of a young teen boy and a young teen girl. And you can see they're obviously wrestling in some type of lip lock. Okay? Her hands were on his waist, but the young man had no hands. She didn't know where those hands belonged on her. So you could see the drawing was very, very well articulated and very expressive. You could feel the passion in it. But knowing where the young man's hands were, he had no hands. All right? So sometimes we have to be able to look into that and interpret it. The other is, even those who are very quiet will have a desire to share with someone that's trusted. And if it's not the family, let's hope then as a basketball coach or as a scoutmaster or somewhere we have someone that we could actually allow them to interact in a way that they have confidence and trust. It's interesting because have you observed about the time that boys turn from about 12, 13, 14, the relationship with mom and dad really can become distanced? And all of a sudden in walks Scoutmaster and he has this great relationship. Or all of a sudden hero coach that's spitting and chewing has more influence than dad who never chewed at all. Right? And that's where we have then a responsibility as parents, I believe, to support and choose the best coaches. Or even approach them and say, hey, I'm concerned about so-and-so. Is there any way that you could or I could communicate with them? Okay? If you're the coach, ask the parents, I'm concerned about Timmy or Bobby. He's not acting the same as he used to. Okay? Parents, if you start to see your boy who's been so loving all along become very defiant and secretive, what a lot of parents would say, oh, he's so oppositional defiant. Look again. He's likely trying to hold some shame or hide some shame. Okay? Make it safe again, not out of guilt and shame, but because you love him. The most important question, okay, to ask any person, child or adult, is this. What is your biggest concern? You'll be amazed what children will say. What's your biggest concern? You'll be absolutely astounded when they say, with tears in their eyes, I'm not getting 100% in math. That wasn't what I was thinking. Okay, what's your biggest concern? This little kid on the playground took my ball. Okay, what's your biggest concern? I'm just not a... Wow. When I ask adults, and I have adult mothers who come to me who have addiction because somebody didn't respect these boundaries, okay? And they come to me and I say, what's your biggest concern? And an adult mother says, I'm so addicted to prescription drugs, okay? Or an adult mother who says, nobody knows this, but I have this that I'm doing. I just needed a place to come and say or share. What's your biggest concern? Well, I wrote on here my back, and I wrote on here PMS, and I wrote on here, but since you ask, I'm really burdened by this, and I have been for a long time. Okay? You'll be amazed at how much healing can be expressed through addiction and helping people to overcome addiction. Not by you becoming a vault of secrets for them, because I would trust that over half of the people in this room are oldest kids. Raise your hand if you're an oldest kid in here. Yeah, okay? Every one of you are masters of secrets. You're the greatest secret keepers. You're so loyal. No one would ever think that you couldn't keep their secret. And because of that loyalty, it makes you very vulnerable and susceptible to bearing other people's burdens in a way that can actually bury you. Okay? So when I say that, recognize that you may be bearing someone else's burden that really isn't yours, that may be affecting you in this relationship. And when you do that, oftentimes that can end up creating a lot of disharmony and dissatisfaction for you.
So what's the best way to help them overcome their addiction then?
Great question. So the question right now is, what is the best way to help them to overcome addiction? And right now, since we're talking about pornography, we're going to speak specifically about pornography addiction. The first thing is to help them to understand that they aren't shameful and guilty. The first exposure likely was not something they sought out. It most likely was the boy on the bus who heard another boy talking about something and went home and just said, wow, I was so curious I had to go look. It was the boy who was exposed by a dad. It was the boy who was with a group of boys back in the 70s walking underneath a bridge and found something on the side of the road. That doesn't happen as much now. It's the little boy and the little girl who are searching YouTube and all the pop-up crud on the side that's just vomiting on them. They finally click and, oh my goodness, how did that happen? Okay? So first of all, help them to know that that initial exposure likely wasn't their choice. And they aren't guilty or shameful for it. What happened was bad, not them bad. That's statement one. Number two, because they're so loved, there is hope. And that hope is you're going to help them by creating rules to increase their trust level of themselves. Now here's the key. Anyone who's overcoming addiction will have a relapse more often than not. So the biggest key is to help them to start to live a rule of ratios. When I work with young men who've been exposed to pornography and they've begun to live in addiction, that's exactly what we have to change. Number one, eliminate shame. Number two, establish an environment of love and safety. Number three, they have to create confidence in a rule of ratios. So if they were looking daily and now they haven't looked for 2 weeks and all of a sudden they look again, hooray! You did it! Okay? This is the young man that comes to me and says, I can't even get out of my house. This is a 35-year-old man who came to me. He said, I can't even get out of my house. I'm so addicted to pornography. I can't even get anything done. I sit in my home and I view pornography 6 times a day. I can count it. And I'm so tied and tethered, I can't function. I need your help. Okay? Well, first of all, we had to help him see a change in his ratios. When he came back the next week and said, only once a day. Hooray! What a huge improvement. That went from 6 times to 1 time. We were doing a dance. Wow! Amazing. He came back and said, it's been 2 weeks. It's been a month. I haven't looked for 6 months. The last time I saw him, he said, I got married. I don't know when the last time in the last 2 years is I've looked. He was so excited. Okay? Another guy I worked with who came, he was so buried that he couldn't even speak to his wife. And when she caught him, what was the first thing he denied and lied and continued to just throw back on her? It's your problem. It's your fault. Okay? But he had to start to change his ratios. And once he changed his ratios, all of a sudden he just started running and he's so much more free because the ratios improved to where now he can't remember when the last time was. And so we have to start to celebrate ratios. Okay? Celebrate the ratio. You did it. Way to go. If we can actually celebrate those ratios, though, the ratios are actually kept by keeping rules. Most people, when it comes to pornography in their body, have no concept of rules. No one ever taught them what are the rules about your body. If this amazing body has the ability to lift enormous weights, if it has the ability to conquer great heights, to be able to create something as unique as this building, and in the future, to be able to do amazing creative things, if the rules haven't been established, how will they ever know? So then they also have to have someone who can help them be a report of their progress, or in other words, follow up. One of the counselors who works with children with addictions to pornography actually has the child text her before they get in the shower and then after they get in the shower. I'm getting in the shower now, and then they have to text back, NM, that means no masturbation. He has to send back a text. Who's ever done that? Okay, but it gives them an opportunity to report and follow up. If they don't have that, then how would they know? How would they know how to change? Okay, so if we help them to establish safe rules, which maybe I'll keep the passwords for the internet. When you're ready to work or do your schoolwork, let's go in and work together. I'll be happy to help you. Let's celebrate your ratios. Okay, now, when we understand really the addiction of pornography, let me actually help us and conclude with this concept. Most people think that addiction is something that you just throw away like a pack of cigarettes and say, I'm done. I don't have to ever do it again. But the reality is, ratios are increased when we understand what is the primary trigger to addiction. So remember, addiction is the ability to express feelings, okay? The inability to express, and in this case, the ability to express feelings through words. Therefore, addiction is the inability to express feelings through words. Okay? What then would be the greatest trigger for addiction? This is where I have men again in their mid and late 30s that come in and say, oh my goodness, I'm so addicted. I've been to every single counselor on the planet. I can't overcome this. I don't know what to do. Okay? How are you going to help me? Well, the first key is helping them understand that the trigger is the feeling of being unprepared. In the past, we've talked about, and people have described, a feeling of fear of failure. But how can you fail if you never even tried? And that's what's actually disabling our young people now. They're afraid to even try. Because things are so quickly gratifying them, all they have to do is turn on the internet, turn on the television, go to the refrigerator, go to an activity. They're going to get candy. They don't have to go because they just went because it was a good activity. They have to go to get the reward for going. They have to attend class so they can have the celebration of the party for attending class. What happened to the time when we got a satisfaction of job well done and our own brain had a 9 hertz spike said, way to go. So now they have to have candy at every activity just to lure them out. But this trigger of feeling unprepared is the primary trigger of addiction. So the feeling where the man says, you know what, my bills, it's the first of the month. Oh my goodness, I don't have enough money. I feel so unprepared. Where does he find himself? Sitting in front of the computer screen searching more images. Okay? The feeling of being unprepared for the young teen who's got this final exam. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Where is he going to find himself? With the trigger, okay, of being unprepared, and he's going to turn to his addiction because he can't say, I feel unprepared. So the biggest trigger is unpreparedness. Observe it. When you feel for yourself unprepared, how nice does the Dr. Pepper sound? When you feel for yourself unprepared, how available is a chocolate? When you feel for yourself unprepared, how available is that little stash of goodies that seems to satisfy? And what you'll observe is it's a feeling of being unprepared. So if you can stop and say then, how can I be better prepared? So the last thing here is preparation. Be prepared. Wow, that sounds like Boy Scouts to me. Okay? Preparedness is how we overcome addiction. And so our last challenge for us as adults is be prepared. Because every one of us will be exposed. But what are we going to do? We're going to have to crash and tell. So put that in order. Every one of us will at some point, be it soft or hard, be exposed to something in this fast-paced world. But guess what? We all have appetites, passions, and desires, and they're godly. And because of that, it's safe to crash and tell, and we're prepared. And we're going to come across people who are going to be living in addiction, but help them to understand what's your trigger, and let's be better prepared the next time it comes to increase our ratios so that our rules can be followed and safeguarded us and increase our trust of ourselves. Self-trust is where it begins, and give them confidence again to be able to be trusting of themselves. I know you have a lot of places to choose to be, again on a Wednesday evening. Thanks for choosing to spend, this is actually Thursday evening. Thanks for choosing to spend this evening with us.